There are things about land that city people never understand. They look at a ridge of scruffy timber and see nothing. They see a problem. They see acres that don't earn, miles of rock and clay and scrub brush that cost money to hold and give nothing back. They call it wasteland. What they don't understand is that land never lies. It remembers everything. It holds what people bury in it, both the things they meant to bury and the things they didn't know they were carrying. I know that now. I didn't know it the morning they called my name at the Harlan County Children's Home and told me a lawyer was waiting in the front office. I was 17 years old, and the only thing I owned that mattered was a photograph of my mother standing in a field of tall corn, laughing at something just outside the frame. I kept it folded in the front pocket of my jeans. I'd had it since I was 8 years old, since the accident on Route 9 that took both my parents on a Tuesday morning in October. I didn't know much about my grandfather, Elias Cobb. My mother had talked about him sometimes, in the careful, quiet way people talk about someone they love but can no longer reach. She said he was a hard man. Not cruel, hard. The way good iron is hard. She said he'd worked 60 acres of ridge land his whole life. She said the land was in him, the same way the creek was in the valley, not placed there but born there, grown out of the same earth. When I arrived at the children's home after the accident, no one came for me. Not Elias. Not anyone. I was told later that he had tried, that there had been paperwork, lawyers, a custody dispute. The county decided otherwise. I was placed, and that was a word they used, like I was a book on a shelf, and the years moved along without me understanding any of it. Then, in the first week of February, Elias Cobb died at 79 years old in the house he was born in. And 3 days later, I was told a lawyer was waiting in the front office. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. The front office at the children's home always smelled like instant coffee and industrial floor wax. It was a small room with a presswood desk, a motivational poster of a lighthouse that had been there since before I arrived, and 2 plastic chairs that had cracked along the arms from years of nervous children sitting in them and not knowing what to say. The woman at the desk was Mrs. Greer, who ran the home with a kind of exhausted competence that I had come to respect. She nodded when I came in and gestured toward the chairs. Sitting in one of them was a woman I had never seen before. She was somewhere in her 60s, small and angular, wearing a wool blazer the color of old moss and carrying a leather briefcase, so worn at the corners that it had gone soft. She had gray eyes that were precise and unhurried, the kind of eyes that had read a great deal of fine print. She stood when I entered and held out her hand. "Ruth Alderman," she said. "I represent the estate of Elias Cobb." I shook her hand. It was dry and firm. "I understand you're Caleb," she said. "Caleb Cobb." "Yes," I said. She opened the briefcase and removed a single manila folder. She did not sit back down. She stood there, unhurried, and looked at me the way a person looks at something they've been thinking about for a long time and have finally come to see. "I want to tell you first," she said, "that your grandfather thought about you. Whatever you may have heard or not heard, he thought about you." I didn't say anything to that. I had spent 9 years not knowing what Elias Cobb thought, and I had made a kind of peace with not knowing. I nodded for her to continue. She opened the folder. The estate of Elias Cobb included the primary farmhouse and its outbuildings, approximately 110 acres of tillable bottomland, all farm equipment, 2 vehicles, and a cash account at First Harlan Savings amounting to a little over $40,000. "The will," she said, "designates all of the above to Vernon Cobb, your grandfather's son by a second marriage. Vernon is your uncle by half-blood." I said nothing. I had not expected anything different. I had not known there was anything to expect at all. She continued, "To Caleb Cobb, grandson, the will designates 60 acres of Back Ridge property, parcel number 14-089, lying north and east of main farm boundary along the ridge line of Cutter's Ridge." She closed the folder and looked at me. "I want you to know what most people at the reading said about those 60 acres, she said. She said it plainly, without apology. They called it wasteland. Vernon Cobb laughed when it was read aloud. He said, and these are his words, that your grandfather had done you one last disservice by leaving you 60 acres of rock and scrub that wouldn't grow a decent potato and weren't worth the county taxes to hold. Other people in the room, neighbors, the farm extension agent who had known Elias for decades, They didn't laugh, but they didn't disagree. The ridge had a reputation. It was steep. The soil was thin. The timber had been poorly managed years before and never recovered. The creek that ran the lower edge of it flooded hard every spring and cut into the bank. Nobody farmed it. Nobody had ever farmed it. People in the county thought of Cutter's Ridge the way they thought of old machinery that had sat too long in the weather, good for nothing, possibly a liability. She paused. I want you to think about something, she said. Your grandfather was not a careless man. He was not given to gestures. In 40 years of knowing him, and I knew him that long, I never once saw him do anything without a reason. She reached back into the briefcase and removed something that was not a legal document. It was a map, old, folded into quarters, printed on heavy paper that had gone soft along the creases. She unfolded it and laid it on the desk between us. It was a surveyor's plat, hand annotated in blue ink. I could see the boundary lines of the ridge property, the notations for elevation and drainage, the creek line, and in the margins, in a handwriting I did not yet recognize but would come to know as well as my own, there were notes, measurements, dates, numbers. I want you to hold on to this, she said. Don't show it to Vernon. Don't tell him I brought it. Come to my office Thursday morning early. There are things about those 60 acres that your grandfather wanted to tell you himself, and since he ran out of time to do it, he left the telling to me. She refolded the map and held it out. I took it. It was lighter than it looked, but it had the weight of something that has waited a long time to be found. Vernon Cobb came to the children's home the following afternoon. I knew who he was before Mrs. Greer told me. He had that specific confidence of a man who has never been told no by anyone he considered his equal. He was somewhere in his 50s, thick through the chest, with a wide jaw and the kind of permanent tan that comes from years of outdoor work or from spending enough money on fishing trips. He wore a good coat and boots that had been expensive once. He sat down across from me in the same chair Ruth Alderman had sat in and spread his hands on the table between us like a man laying out a hand of cards he already knows he's going to win with. I want to be decent about this, he said. I know we don't know each other. I know Daddy kept you at a distance, and I'm sorry for that. That was between him and the county, and it wasn't right. He paused to let the apology settle, to let me feel grateful for it. The way he said it made clear he had decided what my feelings should be and was giving me time to arrange them correctly. I said nothing. He continued, I've been going through the estate, and I want to make sure everything's settled clean. The ridge property, those 60 acres, I want to be honest with you, there's nothing there. You know that. The county tax bill on that parcel is going to run you $300 a year, and there's not a crop, a tree, or a mineral on that ridge worth a plug nickel. He smiled. What I'm willing to do, he said, is take that parcel off your hands. Save you the headache. I'll give you $1,500 for it. Cash. Today, if you want. You walk out of here with $1,500 free and clear, and no land obligations in a county you don't even live in. He sat back, satisfied. It was a generous offer, by his logic. He was doing me a favor. I thought about the map folded in my jacket pocket. I thought about Ruth Alderman's gray eyes and the way she had said your grandfather was not a careless man. I said, I appreciate you coming, Mr. Cobb. I need a little time to think. His satisfaction did not flicker, not visibly, but something behind his eyes shifted slightly, the way a card player's expression shifts when someone refuses to bet the way they expected. He nodded. Take your time, he said. I'm a patient man. He stood, shook my hand, and left. I watched the door close behind him. I went back to my room and unfolded the map on my bed and studied it for a long time. And the more I looked, the more I understood that there was something written there that I did not yet have the language to read. Ruth Alderman's office was on the 3rd floor of a stone building on Main Street in Harlan that had once been a bank and still had the solid, unhurried gravity of a place accustomed to holding other people's important things. There was a secretary who offered me coffee and a seat, and then Ruth herself appeared in the doorway of an inner office and waved me in. The room was floor-to-ceiling shelves of files and binders, with a large desk at the center that held a legal pad, an old gooseneck lamp, and a second copy of Surveyor's Plat, this one unfolded and weighted flat with a pair of paperweights. She sat down. I sat across from her. She folded her hands on the desk. Your grandfather filed a quiet title action on the Cutter's Ridge parcel in 1987, she said. Do you know what that is? I shook my head. It's a lawsuit, typically, against the world, to establish that you are the definitive legal owner of a piece of property, that no one else has a competing claim. Elias did this because in 1986, a man from Lexington came through this county on behalf of a gas exploration company and told him the ridge might be sitting over a formation of natural gas. The man offered to buy the mineral rights. Elias didn't sell them. He also didn't tell anyone about the conversation. Not his neighbors, not his attorney at the time, and not Vernon. He went home and he called me, and we spent the next 4 years making absolutely certain that the mineral rights to those 60 acres were attached to the surface title, clean and irrefutable, in his name alone. I stared at her. He thought the ridge had gas under it, I said. He was certain enough to spend 4 years making sure no one could dispute it, she said. She pulled a document from a folder. In 1993, she said, an exploration company ran a seismic survey on the ridge, with Elias's permission, under a paid option agreement. The survey confirmed the presence of a natural gas formation at approximately 3,000 feet below the surface. The formation is modest by industry standards, not enough to make anyone a billionaire. But she slid the document across the desk. Under current royalty structures for Appalachian gas extraction, it would generate reliable income for 20 to 30 years. I looked at the document. The numbers were not extravagant, but they were real. They were the kind of numbers that change the shape of a person's life. I looked up. Why didn't he sell? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because the company that wanted to buy everything. She said, the mineral rights, the surface rights, the right to run pipelines and access roads to the bottom farm. Vernon had been pushing him to sell the whole farm for years. Elias didn't want to sell. He didn't want to sell any of it, but he knew he was getting old, and he knew that once he was gone, Vernon was going to try to do whatever he wanted. So he separated the ridge from the bottom farm. He put it in a separate parcel, gave it its own legal description, recorded the mineral rights separately with the county clerk's office, and made sure the deed chain was airtight. And then he left it to you. Why me? I said. She smiled just slightly. Because you couldn't be pressured, she said. You weren't here. Vernon couldn't talk you into anything. Couldn't weigh you down over Sunday dinners. Couldn't make you feel obligated. You were a clean hand to hold it. And because, she said more quietly, you are your mother's child. And Elias believed your mother would have known what to do with it. She opened a second folder. There's more, she said. In 2019, a water rights survey done for the county identified a subsurface aquifer running along the eastern edge of the ridge parcel. The county approached your grandfather about establishing a registered easement for municipal water access. He negotiated. The easement agreement, she said, is registered in your name. As the new title holder, you inherit the right to renegotiate that agreement when it comes up for renewal in 18 months. The county has been paying $300 a year for it. The going rate for that kind of easement by current standards is closer to $3,000. She placed 2 more documents in front of me. A copy of the recorded mineral rights deed, a copy of the water easement agreement, both bearing Elias Cobb's name. Both now, by the terms of his will, bearing mine. I sat with those papers for a long time. Outside Ruth Alderman's window, Harlan's Main Street moved quietly through a gray February morning. Trucks going past, a dog crossing the street, a woman in a red coat carrying a grocery bag. The ordinary world, going about its business, unaware that 60 acres of ridge land that everyone in the county had laughed at were worth considerably more than the laughter. When I left Ruth's office, I walked to the end of Main Street and stood at the bridge over Clover Creek and looked at the hills. You could see Cutter's Ridge from there. To the north, a dark line of timber against the pale winter sky. I had never stood on it. I had never seen it except from a distance. But I had grown up hearing it dismissed, the way all the things I was connected to had been dismissed. The orphan boy, the dead parents on Route 9, the grandfather who never came, the 60 acres of wasteland. I was beginning to understand that what people dismiss is not always worthless. Sometimes what people dismiss is exactly what they are afraid of. I called Ruth from the bridge. I have some questions, I said. She said she expected as much. What does Vernon know? I asked. He knows the mineral rights were registered, she said. He found that out when we filed the quiet title in 1987. He was a teenager then, and Elias told him the survey had come back negative, that there was nothing there. He believed it, or chose to believe it. In the years since, he has tried twice to buy the ridge parcel from Elias outright. Both times Elias refused without giving a reason. Vernon has always assumed it was stubbornness. That was the old man being ornery and holding on to worthless land out of pride. He doesn't know about the 1993 survey. I said, he does not, and he does not know about the water easement. He knows there is an easement registered. It's part of the public record. But he believes it's a minor drainage easement worth nothing. He has never looked closely enough to find out otherwise. He came to you with $1,500? She asked. Yes. She made a quiet sound that was not quite a laugh. He is not a stupid man, she said. He came to you quickly because he knows something is attached to that parcel, even if he doesn't know what. He wants it gone before you have time to find out. She paused. Which means you should not be in a hurry, Caleb. Don't sell. Don't agree to anything. And don't let him know what you know. Not yet. What happens next? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. There's a county commissioners meeting in 6 weeks, she said. The Water Authority is on the agenda. They are presenting a long-range water infrastructure plan that includes the Cutter's Ridge Aquifer as a primary source for a new municipal supply line. It's a public meeting. She paused. I think you should attend. The 6 weeks between Ruth's office and the county commissioners' meeting were some of the longest of my life. Vernon Cobb came back twice. The first time he raised his offer to $4,000 and added that he was being generous given the tax liability and the cost of survey. I told him I needed more time. The second time he came with a man he introduced as his business associate, a developer from Lexington in a sport coat that looked expensive in a way that things look expensive when someone has worked very hard to make them appear that way. This man talked about ridge properties in the region, about development potential, about the challenges of subsurface mineral claims in Appalachian counties. He was talking around something, the way people do when they know the direct route is too revealing. I listened to all of it. I said I appreciated them making the trip. I said I was still thinking. The developer looked at Vernon with the expression of a man who has just been told the furniture he wanted to buy has already been sold to someone else. Vernon smiled at me without warmth and said, Son, you don't want to wait too long on this. Land doesn't hold its value forever when there's no one to work it. On the drive back to the children's home, I unfolded Elias Cobb's annotated map and looked at the numbers he had written in the margin in 1993 and understood, maybe for the first time, that he had known exactly what he was doing. He had been an old man holding worthless land out of pride. He had been a farmer holding something of extraordinary value out of patience. He had held it and managed it and kept the secret of it, and then given it to the one person in his family who had not been in the room long enough to be manipulated. I thought about my mother laughing in that photograph, in a field of tall corn, at something just outside the frame. I wondered if she had known. I wonder if Elias had told her, or if he had planned to, before Route 9 took that possibility away. I wondered if the thing she was laughing at was a knowledge of what the ridge was worth, or just the ordinary brightness of a good summer day. I kept the map folded in my jacket pocket the way I had always kept her photograph. They lived together in there, side by side. If this story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you never miss another story like this one. The Harlan County Commissioners' meeting was held in a low brick building 2 blocks from the courthouse. The room had fluorescent lights and folding chairs and smelled of old carpet and coffee from a percolator on a side table that had been running since before anyone arrived. It was about half full when I came in with Ruth Alderman. She had coached me on the procedure. We sat near the back. Vernon Cobb was already there. He was in the 3rd row with the Lexington developer beside him, both of them in conversation with a county official I didn't recognize. I watched Vernon's eyes find me across the room. He hadn't expected me to be there. His expression did not change, but his posture shifted. The way a man's posture shifts when a game he thought he was winning becomes something different. The meeting opened with standard county business. road maintenance appropriations, a zoning variance on a commercial property, a school board report. I sat through all of it. Ruth sat beside me, reading a document from her briefcase with the calm of someone who has sat through a great many county meetings and is not troubled by the pace of civic procedure. Then the County Water Authority administrator came to the podium. His name was Gerald Pruitt, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a methodical manner and the kind of voice that settles rooms. He had a presentation on a pull-down screen. He talked about the county's aging municipal water infrastructure, the projected demand increase over the next 20 years, the cost of the current supply arrangement and its limitations. Then he put up a map. I recognized it immediately. It was a county topographic map, and set it on it, outlined in blue, was the eastern ridge of Cutter's Ridge, the Mayfield Aquifer Formation. Pruitt said, referencing the map, a significant subsurface water source lying beneath approximately 40 acres of private ridge property in the north part of the county. He looked at the room. This aquifer is critical to our long-range water infrastructure plan. The county has maintained a registered easement on this property for water access since 2019, under an agreement with the previous landowner, Elias Cobb. He pulled up a slide with the easement terms. The current agreement was due for renegotiation, he said, and the county was seeking a long-term arrangement, 20 years, at terms to be negotiated with the new landowner. He looked up from his presentation. He looked toward Vernon Cobb. Mr. Cobb, are you prepared to discuss terms? Vernon sat forward with the comfortable ease of a man who has been expecting to be called on. He opened his mouth. Ruth Alderman stood up. She did it without hurrying. She said, Mr. Chairman, the registered owner of the Cutter's Ridge parcel, including the surface title, the attached mineral rights, and the water easement rights, is not Vernon Cobb. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when the air pressure changes. Ruth continued. Parcel number 14-089, 60 acres on Cutter's Ridge, was conveyed by the will of Elias Cobb, recorded with the county clerk's office on the 8th of this month, to Caleb Cobb, minor, presently residing in Harlan County. She placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. The title holder is present. Vernon turned in his chair. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has realized, far too late, that the game he thought he was winning had different rules than he understood. The chairman looked at Pruitt. Pruitt looked at his documents. He pulled up a new slide, the recorded deed. He read the parcel number. He looked at Vernon. He looked at me. The administrator said, slowly, it appears a recorded deed does indicate a separate conveyance. We'll need to verify. Ruth said, I have certified copies. She walked to the podium and placed a folder in Pruitt's hands. Everything in it was in order, she said. The original deed recording, the quiet title judgment from 1990, the mineral rights registration, the easement agreement, and a letter from our office, as legal representatives of the new title holder, indicating our client's willingness to discuss a renegotiated long-term easement with the County Water Authority. She returned to her seat. The room had the quality of a place where something large has just shifted and no one has quite worked out which direction has gone. I sat very still. Across the room, Vernon Cobb was doing the kind of math in his head that a man does when a situation he thought he controlled has turned out to contain variables he never accounted for. I could see him doing it. The math was not going in his favor. His business associate leaned toward him and said something in a low voice. Vernon shook his head slightly. He looked at me again, not with cruelty this time, with something I had not expected to see from him, something that looked almost like recognition, like a man who has finally understood something about his father that he should have understood a long time ago. The chairman called a brief recess. In the hallway during the recess, Vernon found me. He looked older than he had the first time he came to the children's home. Not older in years, older in some other way. Like something he had been carrying a long time had gotten heavier in the last 20 minutes. He stood in front of me for a moment without speaking. Then he said he knew the whole time. I said, yes. Vernon looked at the floor. He said, I've been trying to buy that ridge for 15 years. He told me it was worthless. Every time. He stopped. He ran a hand across the back of his neck. He didn't tell me any of it, he said. Not the gas. Not the water. Nothing. I said, he told me. Or he tried to. He left the map. He left Ruth. That was his way of telling. Vernon was quiet. I thought about what Ruth had said about Elias being a hard man. Not cruel. Hard. The way good iron is hard. I thought about the way Vernon had laughed at the will reading. The easy contempt of a man who had decided something was worthless without looking closely enough to know. I thought about my mother in that photograph, laughing at something outside the frame. I thought about a child placed in a county home at 8 years old while a legal battle went on without him, and an old man working a ridge that everyone in the county had dismissed, keeping it secret with the patience of someone who understood that land does not hurry and that truth buried in the earth is not gone, only waiting. I didn't have anger left for Vernon. I had spent 9 years in a building full of children who had been failed by people who should have done better, and I had learned there that anger doesn't improve land, and it doesn't build anything worth having. What I had for Vernon was something closer to pity, and something else, something harder to name, a kind of responsibility, because whatever Elias had built and held and protected, he had built it for the family, all of it, even the part of the family that had laughed. I said to Vernon, I'm not interested in locking you out of what your father built. He was your father too. What I'm interested in is making sure what he protected gets protected the right way, going forward. Vernon looked at me for a long time. He said, You're 17 years old. I said, I know. He said, You know what your grandfather saw in you? I didn't answer. He said, I'll be honest. I'm not entirely sure I know what to do with that. I said, Neither do I, but Ruth does. And I think that's what he planned for. We stood in that hallway for another moment, and then the chairman's assistant came to the door and told us the meeting was resuming. We went back in. The county renegotiated the water easement over the following 6 weeks. Ruth handled the negotiations. The new terms were a 20-year agreement at a fair market rate, reviewed annually, with escalation provisions tied to county water revenue. The income it would generate was modest but reliable, enough to cover property taxes many times over and put a steady amount aside year over year. The mineral rights were a longer question. Ruth contacted 2 gas exploration companies. One was the same company that had approached Elias in 1986. She told them the mineral rights were available for a development lease, not a sale, under terms that included surface use restrictions and a specific royalty structure. The negotiations took 4 months. When they concluded, the agreement that was signed included a royalty rate that, over projected life of the formation, would generate more money than Vernon Cobb had offered me for the entire 60 acres many times over. I signed the documents in Ruth Alderman's office on a Tuesday in June. I was 18 by then, aged out of the children's home and living in a rented room above a hardware store on a county road outside of Harlan. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and nothing about it could be taken away by a Tuesday morning on Route 9 or a laughing man at a will reading. Ruth had also helped me track down something I hadn't known to look for. In 1994, Elias Cobb had opened a small savings account at First Harlan Savings and made regular deposits into it for 29 years. The account was small. He hadn't been a wealthy man, but it was in my name. It had been accumulating interest since the year I turned 8 years old, the year I was placed, the year the county decided he was unfit to have me. He had deposited money into it every month for 29 years. He had never told anyone about it. He had never stopped. The day I walked onto the Cutter's Ridge parcel for the first time, I went alone. It was a Monday morning in late July, clear and hot, with a sky so blue it looked almost too deliberate, like a sky in a painting. I parked on the county road and went to the field gate, and up through the pasture grass, and into the timber, following the creek line the way Ruth had showed me on the surveyor's plat. The timber was scrubby near the bottom, second-growth hickory and tulip poplar, but it opened up as the ridge climbed, and the air changed, cooler, drier, with a particular quality of stillness that I have since come to associate with high ground that has not been disturbed in a long time. I climbed to the ridge line and stood there. Below me, the county spread out in a patchwork of farm and timber and road, the creek glinting silver in the valley, the rooftops of Harlan just visible in the south. You could see a long way from Cutter's Ridge. You could see everything. I thought about Elias Cobb climbing this ridge. I thought about him standing on the same line of high ground, looking out over the same valley, understanding something about this piece of earth that no one else had taken the time to understand. He had not been a man who gave things away. He had not been a man who spoke easily about what mattered to him. But he had stood on this ridge for 60 years and kept it secret with a patience that most people spend their whole lives wishing they had. And when he ran out of time to tell me himself, he left me a map and a lawyer and an account that had been adding up month by month since I was 8 years old. I sat down on a flat stone near the ridgeline and stayed there for a long time. Below me, somewhere in the bottomland, the farm Elias had worked his whole life was still there, under Vernon's management now. Quieter than it had been. Vernon had not laughed at me again. After the commissioners' meeting, he had been quiet and careful, the way a man is quiet and careful when he has understood that he has made a serious misjudgment and is reckoning with what it cost him. He had called Ruth twice in the month since, not to contest anything, but with questions about this state, practical questions. He was trying to understand what his father had built, which was probably the first time he had ever seriously tried. Ruth told me she thought he might make something of it, given time. I was inclined to believe her. I did not have hatred for Vernon. I had decided that early. Hatred is a thing you have to carry, and I had been carrying things since I was 8 years old that weren't mine to carry. I had set most of them down. The photograph of my mother in the corn was still in my pocket. I looked at it sometimes the way you look at something you are grateful for, and cannot fully explain. She was laughing at something outside the frame. I had decided that the thing outside the frame was this ridge, this view, this particular blue sky, in late July. The thing she was laughing at was all of this, waiting to be found. By the following spring, I had moved out of the rented room and into a small house in the county, a modest place with a front porch that faced south. I was enrolled in the community college in Harlan, studying land management and environmental science, fields that would let me understand the ridge the way Elias had understood it, from the inside out. Ruth was helping me establish a formal land trust that would govern the mineral development and the water easement, making sure the surface of the ridge was protected from the industrial use that sometimes accompanies extraction. We had hired a local forester to assess the timber and develop a long-term management plan. The ridge, it turned out, had more value in its standing timber than anyone had estimated. Not the scrubby second growth near the base, but the older stand of white oak near the summit that had been growing undisturbed for the better part of a century. We were not going to cut it. We were going to let it grow. Vernon came to see me in March. He drove out to the house on a cold Saturday morning and knocked on the door and stood there on the porch looking at the frost still on the grass. I poured 2 cups of coffee, and we sat on the porch and looked south toward the ridge line in the distance. He said, "I owe you an apology." I waited. He said, "I owe you more than one. For what I said at the reading. For what I offered you. For not asking questions I should have asked a long time ago about how you ended up where you did." I said, "It wasn't your fault that I ended up in the home. It wasn't your decision." He said, "No, but I didn't ask. I could have asked." He looked at his coffee. "I think about that." I said, "Your father kept things to himself. It wasn't only you he didn't tell." He looked at the ridge. What was he like? He asked. Not, what was he like as a father, necessarily. I mean, what was he like as a man? I thought about it. I said, I don't know him well enough to answer that fairly. I know he was patient. I know he understood the land he was working. I know he kept a secret for 30 years to protect something he believed in. Vernon nodded. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, he used to take me up on the ridge when I was young. Before the second marriage. Before everything. We'd go up there on Saturday mornings. Just the 2 of us. He never said much. Just walked. I said, maybe he was showing you something. Vernon looked at me. Maybe, he said. He did not say anything else. But his face had the quality of a man who is finding the first loose thread of something he thought was entirely gone and is not sure yet whether to pull it. We finished the coffee. He shook my hand before he left and held it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. It was a handshake of a man beginning something, or trying to. I stood on the porch after he drove away and looked at the ridge and thought about what it holds, gas and water and good white oak timber, and one old surveyor's map annotated in blue ink by a man who understood that the things you protect in silence are sometimes the only things worth protecting. I thought about a savings account opened in a child's name and added to every month for 29 years. I thought about the quality of patience that it takes to do something like that, quietly, without recognition, without the knowledge that anyone would ever understand it. I thought about land, about what it holds, about what people bury in it, the things they mean to bury, and the things they carry into it without knowing. The ridge was still there. It would be there long after I was done with it. Whatever I built on what Elias left me, I planned to leave it the same way he had left it, cleaner than I found it, and carrying something forward for the one who came after me. That was the inheritance. Finally, not 60 acres of scruffy ridge timber and gas wells and water rights, though those were part of it. The inheritance was the understanding of what patience looks like when it is practiced over a lifetime in silence and without applause. The understanding that land does not lie. The understanding that what people call wasteland is often only land they have not looked at carefully enough or long enough, or with the right kind of eyes. The ridge was real. The secret it had held was real. And the man who had stood on it in all weathers for 60 years, keeping that secret with the steady gravity of someone who understood that some things are worth waiting for, he was real too. Even if I had only known him through a map, a lawyer, and the monthly deposits of a man trying to do right by a child he had failed to reach in time. I knew him. The land had told me who he was. Land always tells the truth. You only have to learn how to read it. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.